Welcome back, everybody, to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course, we continue our exploration and study for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administrator exam. In this video, what we're going to take a look at is a couple of things that are memory related. We're going to take a look at a couple of ways, both on the GUI and the command line, in order to evaluate the memory usage of our virtual machine, and then how to resize that RAM or the storage of our virtual machine. So let's take a look at a couple of the things we have. Let's start off with our GUI here. For managing our virtual machine, again, we have our running virtual machine. And if we right-click here and we go to Open, it'll connect to the console, but what we're interested in here is here. Now, from an overview perspective, if I go to performance right now, live, it will tell me what my CPU, memory, and disk I/O is associated with this particular VM. In this case, I see CPU. My memory is disabled. My memory management is disabled. But I know that I've allocated up to 2 gigabytes in use for my system. Now, that doesn't mean that that's what my system is using. So we'll go and drop to the command line. And if we do a ps aux and we grep for virt, we'll see that we've got a couple of things running. So we've got libvirt plus on PID 889, which is the DNS mask. That's not really going to be helpful for us. But what we can see is that we've got libvirt plus 4875, which looks to be QEMU system x86-64, and we see the name Ubuntu Trusty Tar. So if we had done, for example, grep virt, grep Ubuntu, let's go ahead and clear our screen and rerun that command, we'll see that we would have just got 4875. So what does this tell us? Well, it doesn't tell us anything about what memory this particular process is using. But what we can do now that we have this process ID is we can actually watch live what our virtual machine is using. All we have to do here is simply do a top minus P and then the process ID that we just determined. So we're running top. That gives us overall, we have 12 gigabytes of memory, 10 gigabytes in use, 1 gigabyte or 1.5 gigabyte free. It's mainly using it at this point for file system caching. But for this libvirt process, we can see that our virtual memory that's currently being used looks like only about 5-6 megabytes, because this is in KB. So about 6 megabytes of the 2 gigabytes that we've allocated, about 5% of the memory that we've allocated. So we're using very little CPU, we're using very little memory, and we can see the memory that our system is using. Now, if I go back to my virtual manager, now I can go from a memory perspective, is I can raise the amount of memory that's allocated to my system currently or maximally. So this is how I manage my memory. And from a virtual disk perspective, we're not going to apply these changes. We can go to the virtual disk and we can create another virtual disk to add to it. So for example, I can add hardware and all I have to do is find storage, creating a disk image on the computer's hard drive. We'll go ahead and the bus type is IDE by default. We can do SD, we can do SCSI, USB, it doesn't really make any difference. We'll just leave it as the default. And it will create this image. And it's asking me, do we want to make the device available after the next guest shutdown? In this case, sure. What I don't want to do is I didn't want to reboot the system. So now I've made available an additional disk that I could use, for example, if I had an LVM configuration, to grow my disk using LVM and GDisk, just like I would in any event. I would add it to the virtual group and increase the amount of storage space that I have for my LVM system, or I could simply format and install that disk as a secondary drive that's available to my virtual machine. So I can get some of the information that I want from the performance tabs from within my virtual machine as well. CPU performance, memory and disk and network we could turn on. But from an underlying system perspective, which is what I'm really interested in, is I know I've allocated 2 gigabytes up to 2 gigabytes for my virtual machine, but from my physical machine perspective, how do I get what my memory behavior is looking like for that particular process? I simply find the name of my virtual machine inside the QEMU hypervisor process, and then I can monitor that specific process ID and see what it's using in terms of live memory for that particular process. So a combination of command line and GUI-based utilities gives us full control over not only our hypervisor, but the behavior of our guest operating systems on our hypervisor. So for working with the memory and the storage on our virtual machine, as well as understanding and kind of profiling how our memory is being used by our guest operating systems, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.